Oh, thank you very much. I just want to say that I'm in Saanich, which is the municipality that's named after the Wasanic people, their unceded territory. So I'm grateful for the privilege of being able to live here. And my act of reconciliation is to try to put the land back to the way it was historically, even though it's not enough of the land, but I'm doing my part. And I'm here because, well, I want to be the one, or I'm lucky to be the one to introduce Syd. And if you guys, if all the people, there are 95 participants on the Zoom, if you're a nature enthusiast in British Columbia, I think you already know Syd Cannings. But Dave Denning tasked me with introducing Syd. So I'm going to give you a quick recap of Syd's accomplishments so far, since he's still got a lot of life ahead of him. And so Syd grew up in Penticton, and he was part of a nature welcoming household. So he got to just spend all his days outside and doing fun, amazing nature themed things like the Salt Spring Island Nature Club is going to be doing. And he went on to do post-secondary schooling at UBC in the biological sciences. And then he worked for a little over a decade here in Victoria for the Conservation Data Center. And then we lost him. I think he learned everything he needed to about British Columbia and he got bored. So he moved to Whitehorse, which is the only reason why someone like Dave can say that I'm an important naturalist in the province, is because Syd moved away. And so Syd now lives in Whitehorse. He works for the federal government, and he still works he works on species at risk. And so he has to know everything from bees to grizzly bears, and he really does. And so if you want to share the screen now, Dave, that would be great. The last slide. So I did a quick little Google of Syd, and he has written books about natural history for this province specifically. And it's general natural history, the birds of the Okanagan, on being a roadside naturalist, the Pacific Ocean, forests, mountains, geology. Is like, what? Is there anything this guy doesn't know? And then the depth and breadth of Syd's natural history knowledge is so impressive. He is truly a nature superstar. And he's also a lot of fun to be around, and he gives a great presentation. So sit back and enjoy hearing about his latest passion, which is bumblebees.
Thanks very much, Claudia. I can tell you what I don't know, and that's much about spiders, which is what you and Darren really know well, and have tried desperately to teach me, but I seem to be resistant in many ways to learning about spiders. But I do try, and it's wonderful to go out in the field with Claudia and Darren and others, like that picture on, I think that was on top of Idaho Peak up by Atlin there. We had a great time, even though the weather was subarctic at the time. Anyways, thanks very much. I shall start sharing my screen, I guess, and then we'll get underway here. Where did it go? There it is. Oh, I'm in the wrong. I think I have to back up here. Whoops. From beginning. There. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. It's a great honor, of course. Thanks to David and others and Claudia for inviting me to present to you folks. And I was, I've always been member of clubs like yours from my little kid days in the Okanagan, when I think my dad was one of the founding members of the South Okanagan Naturalist Club, and went on to work in the Vancouver Natural History Society and Victoria Natural History Society and so on. So they're great organizations, and I hope everybody joins and gets it going. So tonight, I'm talking, as you probably heard, about bumblebees. And I called this the Buzz on BC Bumble Bees. So the focus is on British Columbia, not just on Salt Spring Island, but there will be a kind of a Salt Spring mention there. I haven't been to Salt Spring Island for so many years, it's embarrassing. And I've got to get there, hopefully this summer. I keep saying that. And every time in Victoria, I'm all occupied with visiting people, and just that little bit of ferry for some reason keeps me from getting to Salt Spring, but I know it's not an excuse. So I'll try try to get over there within the year. So this is a picture of Mount Ptolemy, not Salt Spring, unfortunately. So I'm going to focus on BC bumblebees, tell you a bit about bumblebees in general. And as Claudia said, my latest job is I work with endangered species at risk. And that's, to be honest, how I got interested in bumblebees. For a while there, when I worked at UBC, I was in entomology. I was like Claudia, I was a curator of the insect collection there. But I didn't really learn anything about bumblebees at that time, even though I should have. I kind of thought that everything we already knew a lot about bumblebees, and there were so many other insects that we didn't know enough about. So I focused on those, and I got hooked on dragonflies and other distractions. But about 11 years ago now, a friend walked into my office and who was on the committee on the status of endangered wildlife in Canada and said, Syd, you know, COSEWIC wants to start looking at bumblebees. We were concerned, and so we should start looking at them up here in the Yukon. And that's really what got me going. And I started looking at them, and then I realized how little we knew. So anyways, that's in the past, and now we're here. So I'm going to try to pass along some of the things I've learned in the last 10 years. So it's about BC, about species at risk, why some bumblebees have declined, and maybe what we can do about it, and so on. And maybe a pitch at the end for some citizen science. So that should fit in with your club, perhaps. So BC bumblebees. Thankfully, there's only 34 native species known in British Columbia. There's one introduced species that's established in Vancouver. One of the common species now in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland is the eastern bumblebee, and that's unfortunate but true. But 34 others live here. But just to get it clear, there are 430 bees in total. There's a lot of bees that I'm not going to talk about tonight. Small bees, mostly solitary nesting bees, but some sort of semi-colonial. But 430 species known, and that both of these totals might climb a bit, especially the 430. Of those 34, 5 bumblebees have been assessed at risk by that committee I mentioned, the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. So about 1/7 of them. We're going to visit all these species in a bit later, but the western bumblebee, the yellow-banded bumblebee, the McKay's bumblebee, Bohemian cuckoo bumblebee, and the Suckley's cuckoo bumblebee. So all these have declined, or we're worried about them, and I'll tell you a bit more about them in detail later. So these, except for the McKay's, which is a northern one, and it's probably declined some bit, but we don't think it's in too much trouble. But these other ones have declined seriously, and I mean pretty seriously, especially in the south, especially in the extreme south, like Salt Spring Island. And those declines began in the late 80s, early 90s. So I'll get to that in a little bit, but I just thought I'd back up a bit, I guess, and talk a bit about bumblebee biology, because most people don't really know how things work in the bumblebee world. So we'll start at the top here in the spring. This, I don't know if you can see my cursor at all, probably not, I don't know. But you can? Oh, good. So this is a queen bumblebee. They overwinter as queens. They're already fertilized, their eggs are fertilized. And they come out in spring and they start feeding. They start gathering nectar, pollen, and so on. And they build a little, well, they try to use like a mammal, an abandoned small mammal burrow, like I don't know, a vole or a rabbit or whatever on Salt Spring Island would make a little hole in the ground. You perhaps know more than I do what that might look like, or it might be just a natural crevice in the rocks and so on. Something that they can get in and build their little nest out of, and they start making these little cups for their larvae. They lay an egg in each of these little cells, just like a honeybee, only it's not like a waxy honeycomb. It's just there are all these little cups. So they perhaps, it depends on the species, but they make a few of these to begin with, and start tending the larvae that emerge, and keep feeding them pollen. Bumblebees, I should back up again. I didn't put this slide in this show, but bees, I'm just going to say bees in general, bumblebees and other bees, are basically very special wasps. And wasps eat meat. Okay, they're carnivores in various sorts. But bees have become the vegan wasps. They're kind of up to date in that sense. So instead of feeding their larvae, dead caterpillars or whatever wasps drag in, they feed them pollen. They're totally focused on gathering pollen for their protein and fat and so on like this. And then they feed them a lot of nectar and get them going that way. So the queen is very busy, and this is a real key part of the cycle down here, this early summer, late spring. So if the weather's bad, if it's rainy a lot, and if there's not that many flowers or whatever, if she has trouble, a lot of these nests fail. The queens don't make a big go of it. But if she's able to get a generation of her first generation, which is all females, they're all workers, and then the workers start flying out and they gather more pollen and more nectar and come back and feed the next generation of the little babies here. And so it grows and grows and grows through the summer. And late in the summer, the last generation that's produced is the sexual generation, the ones that produce males and the queens for next year. And so they come out, and I'm not sure when this happens on Salt Spring. I assume it's like mid-August, probably. It's not, when it says late summer, fall, I mean mid-August to late August, mostly, maybe early September, certainly not October or November. These guys come out, the males and the females, they mate right away. And then the females, as I said, they've got their sperm now, they've got their eggs with the sperm. Then their job in the fall, in September and October, is to find a cozy place to spend the winter. So they go and find places under leaf litter. That's why it's important not to rake up all your leaves in the fall. Make places so that bees can burrow down. It's not in the same place they're going to make their nest in the spring. It's a different place. So it can be under boards. It can be, anywhere they can get out of the weather. And then in the spring, it starts all over again. Okay, so that's just a quick, if I've missed something, you can ask a question and I'll try to get to it later. So when they're out and about in the summer, what do bumblebees need? Well, because they're a colonial species and they're living through that whole season from early spring, which I guess is now in Salt Spring Island, right through to September and October, they need flowers that whole time. So they need a diversity of flowers. And this is up in, I like to call it central BC, up on the Stuart Cassiar Road near Mesiaden. So there's, fireweeds here, but, and you guys can tell me better what's on Salt Spring, early, middle, late summer, and so on. But they need a supply of it all summer long or they won't succeed. Some bees, like the individual little solitary bees, focus on one species or one genus or one family of flowers. And so they're out for a much shorter period in the summer. But bumblebees need everything through the whole year. And they need those burrows or otherwise underground places to nest. That's really important. So make sure you've got a lot of those around if you want to have bumblebees. And a cozy place to hibernate, as I mentioned. So I'm just going to go on running through these bees that have declined and talk a bit about their plight, as it were. And this is the Western bumblebee here, and this is a shot by Jeremy Gatton. I'm not sure where he took this, but this is a bumblebee you could very well see on Salt Spring Island, and it's still around there. There's not as many as there used to, but it's now listed as, well, it hasn't been listed technically yet. That's another issue. We can talk about that later if you want. The bureaucratic thing. It was once the commonest, I would say the commonest bumblebee of the region, and Claudia can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd say, a quarter of every bumblebee if you were there in the early 80s, you went out looking at bumblebees, a quarter of the bumblebees you would see on Salt Spring Island would be Western bumblebees. And now it's probably more like 2%. So there were big declines, like 80, 90, 60 to 80% or 90% in the 90s and 2000s, early 2000s. And about a 90% decline on Southern Vancouver Island. In the rest of British Columbia, it may still be okay in the sort of wilder areas of the mountains in the north. We don't have really good numbers on this, which I want to talk to you about that later, and in the north, but it's still not great. I was looking at numbers of that Claudia and myself and others have collected in the last 10 years that are in the Royal BC Museum. And they make up about 6.5% of those bumblebees in the wilder north now. And I bet you they used to be more there. So we don't have a good idea what it was before, but they're still there. So that's the good news. So how do you tell what a Western bumblebee is? First of all, you look at, it's a big chunky bee for one thing. This is a queen, but even the workers are kind of like squarish looking, they're not slender at all. Even the males are a bit chunky, which most bumblebee males are kind of slender, but it has a black forehead, like no yellow on the front. Okay. Most of the bees in Salt Spring, you'll see have a yellow face. It also have an almost all black abdomen here. It's got this one yellow band on the front of the thorax, but an all black abdomen, except for the rear end, which is in Salt Spring country white. So it's a white bummed black bumblebee. So if you see something like that, make sure, try to take a picture of it, because it's either this one or something even better. So here's the group, the bumblebees that have really declined. Most of them belong to one subgenus of this group we call Bombus, and it's in the subgenus Bombus, the type, the Bombus group. And the Western bumblebee here in green, the Mackays in red, which is where I live here, up here, and in the blue, the yellow banded. They're all closely related siblings in this genus, and they've split over the last several million years into these three different species. But you can see southern BC is, forget this red bit here, that's an artifact of somebody's fancy modeling. But the Western bumblebees, southern BC, Mackay's northern, and actually this blue of the yellow banded here, whoops, there we got them. It actually, the yellow banded really overlaps that quite a bit in central BC and in the Rockies. And they also have a fourth sibling, which I didn't put on this map because it doesn't really exist in Canada anymore, the rusty patch bumblebee, which used to be in southern Ontario, but it seems to have disappeared completely there. So for whatever reason, this group of bumblebees is really sensitive to whatever's happening in the environment. Here's the yellow banded bumblebee, which looks like a Western bumblebee, except it's got these two broad yellow bands across the abdomen. This is a nice big queen, photo by Sarah Johnson, who's a PhD student at Simon Fraser now. It's an Eastern bee, again, big declines in the south. But again, it's still apparently okay in wilder areas and in the north, especially if you go to the Peace River country here, you can find a lot of these. And they're still quite common in northern Alberta and places like that. They vanished from southern Ontario, still aren't really there, but they're still around in northern Ontario, but perhaps not as like they used to be. There is a management plan out for this. I was going to put a link in here, but I think I forgot to put that in there, but you can Google that and look up our management plan. Now, so that was the bumblebees in that Bombus group. Now, all of those are parasitized by two different species of cuckoo bees. So cuckoo bees are just like cuckoos in the bird world, or like cowbirds. They don't necessarily, they're parasites, but they don't lay their eggs on the other bees. They just take over the colonies of the other bees and force the workers there to take care of their own young. And in some cases they kill the other queen, but they certainly, sometimes you can find nests where the cuckoo bees are living side by side the old queen, but basically they take over the nest and it's their young that get produced by the workers instead of the host nest. So the Western, the Mackays, the yellow banded all produce the young of these, like the Bohemian cuckoo bee or the Suckleys, I'll show you in a minute. So you can imagine if you're a parasite of a bee that's declined 90%, you're in big trouble because parasites are by their nature rarer than their hosts. And so this one is endangered, and it's again a nest parasite in that subgenus. It's a whole Arctic species, this one. It's different than the others. It's found right around the northern hemisphere. And for some reason, it's still common in Europe. It's really declined in the built up areas of North America, but its hosts in Europe seem to be doing better than our hosts here. So it's still healthy there. In Canada, we're developing a recovery strategy, and I'm not sure why, but it's being delayed in Ottawa. So I can't say much more about that, but we've written it and identified some critical habitat. But and if you want to know more about the bureaucratic details of that later, I'd be happy to go on and on. Here's a map of the range of the Bohemian bumblebee, cuckoo bumblebee. So you can see historically it stretched from, right across from Alaska, right to Newfoundland. It doesn't go very far south in North America. It's across this sort of southern boreal band, but it was really common in southern Ontario, southern Quebec, New England, and that area, and the Maritimes. And it's just really gone there now. But you can see these blue dots are the ones where it's been seen in the last 10 years. So you can see where I live up in the Yukon, we've found them somewhat regularly. They're not that abundant, but I don't think they ever were up here. And you can see a few small spots here in southern British Columbia and in Alberta. And that's because there's huge bumblebee surveys going on here, and it's taking thousands of bumblebees to find one or two of these cuckoo bumblebees. But you can see two of them. One, the left-hand dot in southern BC here is from the outskirts of Kelowna, of all places. This bumblebee, I didn't think of it as a species of the southern Cordillera, but it gets down this far. And there was one perhaps associated with, Okanagan Mountain Park that ended up in a vineyard in Kelowna. And then this other southern one is in a wilder part of the Pend Oreille Valley in the West Kootenay. And we thought it had vanished completely from Eastern Canada, but I just flew in this other dot here. You can see on the south shore of the St. Lawrence near Rimouski, there's an iNaturalist record from last year. So they're still there. And I'm pretty sure they're still in the wilder parts of New Brunswick here. This dot is from Maine, just across the river. So it's in tough shape, but I think in the north here, if we actually had people out looking for bumblebees, we'd find it more in the north. Its little sibling, which is the western mountain sibling of the Bohemian bumblebee, is the Suckley's cuckoo bumblebee. And it again looks just like the western bumblebee. It's got a bit of yellow here, but sometimes the western does too. But it's again got this whitish bum, black face, and it's threatened. It's been designated threatened. You can see here the map. It goes all across Canada, but it's really always been rare in Eastern Canada. It's really a bumblebee of the Western mountains that gets across. It's kind of like the American three-toed woodpecker. You know how it's a very common bird in our mountain forests here, and it goes right across, but it's really rare in Eastern Canada. It's the same thing with the Suckleys. And it's in real trouble in British Columbia. This was its heartland in the world, probably, and certainly in Canada. And it's only been seen once in the past 10 years. And I think that was in 2013 near McBride. So this used to be a relatively common bumblebee on Salt Spring Island, I would bet. But if you ever see one, please, please, please let me know. One person I just saw on Twitter today, someone in Wyoming found a specimen of these very recently and posted on Twitter today. So that's probably the first record in Western US in the last 10 years. So it's still around, but we need to keep an eye out for it. Again, it's got this black face, a black abdomen, and white bum here. So that's the key thing to look for. Oh, and the other thing to look for here, the thing that separates it from the Western bumblebee, and you'll have to remember this later, is on the hind leg of bees. I didn't mention this before. They have the regular bees have this really shiny concave surface surrounded by long hairs that they use to pack pollen onto. But these bees, because they're cuckoos, they don't gather pollen at all. And so their leg is all rough and hairy here. It's not designed to gather pollen at all. So I don't know if you can see that in the picture, but it's important to look at that hind leg if you want to identify one of these. So enough of those ones that are in tough shape, we'll get back to them in a little bit here, but I just thought I'd mention some of the common bumblebees of Salt Spring right now. And so I just put up 6 because that's what my screen would hold at once. So, and this one on the top left, the yellow-faced bumblebee, and I'm going to talk more about this on the next slide, but it's probably the most abundant one. Correct me if I'm wrong. Again, I haven't been to Salt Spring lately, but it's certainly the most common bumblebee in Victoria. And it's got this, unlike the Western bumblebee, it's got a whitish yellow face. I don't know if you can see that, but its whole forehead and face and the first part of the thorax are this sort of pale yellow, pale kind of lemony color. Very distinctive. And then it's got this pale yellowish white band near the end of the abdomen, not the black. The abdomen has got a black end. It's mostly black, like a Western. So don't panic if you see one of these and think it's a Western, because if it's got a black bum, like this one does, it's just a narrow band, it's a yellow-faced bumblebee. And the yellow-fronted bumblebee is another common one here, and the yellow-faced, of course, is the yellow front is just another name for yellow-faced, but this is a totally different thing. It's got a broad goldeny brown abdomen here too. The first 2 segments are broad and yellow. You won't have to remember all these things, but I'm just trying to say that you can identify them from pictures, most of them, some of them, but I can get to that in a minute as well. So the abdomen is kind of evenly divided, yellow in the front and orange in the back. And then it's got this dirty yellow. It's important to know that it's dirty yellow at the front here. That's the yellow-fronted bumblebee. That's a common one up here in the Yukon too, by the way. It's a very widespread common thing. And another one we have up here in the north that's also down in Salt Spring is the black-tailed bumblebee. Again, it's got a black tail like it's supposed to, but the yellow on the front of the abdomen is just a very narrow band instead of this broad 2-segment band. And there it's again got this really even dirtier yellow band at the front of the thorax, the black-tailed bumblebee, another common one. Fuzzy horned bumblebee. Don't look for the fuzzy horns. They're very hard to see, but again, like the yellow fronted, it's got the front half yellow, the back part is orange, but it's got a broad black band in between them. So I can show you the book later that you should maybe get to identify these things, but just so you know, when you're taking pictures or out there looking, these are the sort of things you should be looking for. You know, what's the color of the abdomen? What is the pattern on the abdomen? What's the face look like? There's all sorts of parts of it that you need to look for. Vancouver Island bumblebee, Bombus vancouverensis, is a very, very pretty bumblebee with a black kind of stripe down the back of the thorax. The yellow in the back is divided in 2 there. And then the abdomen has got this fancy set of stripes of black and whitish yellow and orange with a little black notch and something. Anyways, it's complicated, and there's 2 forms of it, but it's quite distinctive, especially with this black line down the middle of here. And then another big one that I think used to be more common, it's perhaps less common now. I remember seeing it in Gordon Head when I lived there a few years ago, the California bumblebee, sometimes called Bombus fervidus. It's called the yellow bumblebee in the east because it's all yellow, but in the west, it's got a lot of black on the abdomen. But it's got this broad yellow band on the thorax, and the front little bit is yellow, but there's no orange on it at all. So those are the 6 common ones just to show you. But again, there's probably twice that many that are flying around Salt Spring. But here's the yellow face, the one I wanted to tell you a bit more about, because it's got an interesting story to tell you. This is a picture taken in Goldstream by a friend of mine. Until 1996 in Canada, this was only known from a Suyas, from one or two records in the Suyas. And then there was one lone 1970 record from Burnaby of all places. So I'm not sure where that came from. But this is a bumblebee of California and Oregon. And I think perhaps it was moving north, just like house finches at that time, or, Anna's hummingbirds, and it made its way north. There is a possibility that it was brought north to pollinate. It was brought north to pollinate greenhouses, but whether the increase is a result of that, I don't know. By 2001, it had showed up in Vancouver, and it actually made up 2% of the bumblebees in Vancouver in 2001. So it's still quite an uncommon bumblebee, but there. And in 2005, I think, Claudia, you were the one that found the first one on Vancouver Island at Prospect Lake. That was the first record for that area. And by 2007, it was kind of throughout Saanich, but still really rare, less than 1% of the bees. But 3 years later, it was already one of the common bumblebees of the Lower Mainland. And in 2018, just 2 or 3 years ago, it made up over 70% of the bees of Victoria. It's a huge change in the bees of Victoria. And of course, this is going on while the Western bumblebee is declining, and whether those two are even linked, I don't know. It's hard to say. And it is really common because it's one of these bumblebees that make, their colonies have a lot of workers. They come out and they work. They're very numerous workers, and they last all season long. And so they do overwhelm the numbers of the other bumblebees. They're quite a small bumblebee, but they're very common. I've got this just to warn you that there is a rare bumblebee that looks exactly like it, unfortunately, as these things often are. It's very confusing. But if you can train your bumblebee to roll over and play dead, you'll see on the underside of this yellow-faced bumblebee, this white stripe, this yellowy white stripe on the back of the abdomen doesn't go underneath at all. It's a completely black abdomen underneath. But you can see on this one here, I hope you can see this, there's a few scatterings of yellow hairs that sort of spill onto the abdomen underneath. And this is what we call the obscure bumblebee, or the, well, there was another name, the foggy coast bumblebee or something, Bombus caliginosus. And it's here, or it's in that area, but it's very rare. But it would be useful when you're taking pictures of bumblebees on flowers. You know how they tumble around the flowers. Try to get some that show the underside of the abdomen. That would be really helpful to let us know. Otherwise, we just assume they're all yellow-faced bumblebees and let it go at that. We miss the rare ones. So back to these declines, which is the next whole section of this talk, is about the declines and why it may have happened. So in Western bumblebee, these happened primarily in the late 80s and in the 90s. So why did it do? This graph is from a study around Calgary. That was an actual scientific study that actually measured bumblebees statistically, and you could put error bars and everything, and you could see it just going down from 1985 right to 2010, and then they assume it's leveled out a bit because it's still there but rare. So why did they do this? Well, the one coincident thing that happened at that same time, well, two things. There's two things that coincidentally happened. So this is sort of evidence that isn't, we don't have a smoking gun, as it were, but this is the strongest evidence that points to it, are these fungal pathogens, these little microsporidia. They're little things like yeasts, but they're not yeast. They're microsporidian funguses called, now they're called Varomorpha bombi. They used to be called Nosema bombi, but they, of course, the taxonomists have had their way and changed the genus. And these can do a lot of bad things to bumblebees. They can deform the wings. They're a gut parasite, but they can deform the wings, decrease survival of workers and males, prevent queens from matings. And the other thing is they're far more prevalent in these declining species. If you sampled Western bumblebees and then say yellow-faced bumblebees, the Western bumblebees would have far more of these pathogens in them for whatever reason. They're just that much more sensitive to them. And so this happened, and so they can detect an increase in these pathogens at the same time as the Western bumblebee is declining. And what else happened at that same time? Well, it coincided with the use of managed bumblebees in greenhouses. You may not realize this, but all the greenhouse tomatoes and peppers and things that you eat from greenhouses, commercial greenhouses, are now pollinated by commercially raised bumblebees that are grown in facilities in Eastern Canada and Eastern United States, and then shipped in boxes, say out to the Fraser Valley or to Southern Vancouver Island or whatever, to the greenhouses. And the bees are then have their little colony in the greenhouse, and they're supposed to stay in the greenhouse and pollinate their tomatoes. And they're not supposed to get out, but they do get out because, as I said, The common one now that's used for pollination, the common eastern bumblebee, is the common bumblebee of Vancouver. But also at that same time in the 80s, being good entomologists, the people that were trying to develop this thought it would be a good idea to use a native species to use in the West. And so they used the Western bumblebee, and they reared the Western bumblebees and got it going. And they sent them to Europe, where they were doing this in Europe, and developed these colonies and brought them back. And the Western bumblebees were terrible at this because they kept dying. Their colonies kept getting sick and they would die. And so the growers gave up on Western bumblebees and eventually used Eastern bumblebees. So right at that same time, when all the Western bumblebees were failing as greenhouse producers, these parasites were really rapidly increasing in the wild bumblebees around them. So there's a real link there, at least in a time way. So that's what we believe is to be one of the main causes, because it really coincided with that decline, and fingers the species that did decline. In addition to that, there's a number of other things that bumblebees face, the additional threats they face, and that's pathogens like that Varomorpha bombi, but the honeybees have their own pathogens, and they can transfer to bumblebees, because honeybees and bumblebees are quite closely related. They're not in the same genus, but they're in the same family. And so honeybees, if they're in large numbers, can leave their pathogens on the flowers they're pollinating, in their saliva or whatever, and the bumblebees can pick them up. And there's other viruses that honeybees have that they can transfer to bumblebees, deformed wing virus and things like that. And the other main thing to know is that honeybees are really efficient workers and can outcompete native bees if there is limited pollen and nectar. And in many cases, there isn't limited pollen and nectar. There's enough for everybody. But especially early in the season, it's now been shown that honeybees can really limit the food that's available for native bees in their area. And so a standard apiary like this of 40 hives can collect 400 kilos of pollen in 3 months. That's the summer months, so June, July, August. So that's 400 kilos is a big bag of pollen, and that's all the food that the larvae eat. So around this apiary, this is actually in Germany, this picture, there's not much food left for the regular bees, the wild bees, if the honeybees are just foraging a few hundred meters away. Another cause for concern, of course, as many of you know, are the insecticides, especially the neonicotinoids, which were developed to get away from the organophosphates and terrible DDTs and things like that of the earlier part of the 20th century. And there's several ones called imidacloprid. And it's now been shown that these were all developed, and they were all said they were safe for bees because in the lab, the way they measured it, not many bees, the bees didn't die from it. Well, they don't die from it, but they get impaired learning and short-term memory problems, which of course is a problem when you're trying to find food and bring it home. That gives them decreased foraging performance. They have reduced queen production because they're not bringing home enough food. And the colonies fail. The bees don't die, but they don't produce any queens and males for the next generation. So it's a real problem. And there's a lot more controls on neonicotinoids now in the last couple of years out of Health Canada, which I could go into, but it doesn't matter in the sense that for fruit trees like here in Salt Spring Island and in the Okanagan, you can't really use neonicotinoids anymore as a spray during blossom season, but it's still going to be used widespread in Canada for things like canola and soybeans and there's another one. What am I thinking of? Anyways, there's a number of replacements for these too. People are looking at, well, if neonicotinoids are bad, let's replace them with these things. And but recent studies on bumblebees have showed again reduced production and lethargy in the face of these at field levels of the insecticides. So it's a problem. And of course, in British Columbia, we've got a lot of silviculture, and there is some use of insecticides in silviculture. Here's tebufenazide is one used in the east for oh my gosh, my brain's not working. One of the big moth problems that attacks forests back there. And at small concentrations, this one causes learning deficiencies in honeybees, but in field kind of trials, there were no effects on bumblebee production. So we don't really know a lot on that. Then there's herbicides. Now you wouldn't think that herbicides would affect bumblebees, but of course, nowadays in the amount of herbicides we use in our crops, this is from the Fraser Valley, this picture, they've increased dramatically because now we have all these corn crops and other grains and other crops like soybeans that are herbicide ready. They're genetically modified herbicide ready crops so that the crop doesn't get affected by the herbicide, but all the competing weeds do. So you don't have to do your weeding. And that herbicide use has doubled in the last 15 years. In silviculture, it's used less in silviculture than on agriculture, but it's still used, especially in areas where there's problems with shrub competing with your replanting of little baby trees. And fungicides, again, they're supposed to attack the fungus, not the insects. So they're not designed to be toxic in insects, and they're not toxic in experiments. But interestingly enough, this chlorothalonil, Bravo Echo Daconil, which is the commonest fungicide in North America, and it's amazing how many tons per hectare are put on in these big farming areas of the Midwest and of Southern Ontario and places like that. So these fungicides are used in huge amounts. And when someone did a big study on bumblebees, and everywhere they measured the bumblebees, and this was with yellow-banded bumblebees, and measured those pathogens in them, the places where the bees had the most pathogens were also the places, the single most strongest predictor of those pathogen levels was exposure to fungicides. So what the mechanism there is, or whether it's just a measure, maybe fungicides are just a measure of intensive agriculture in general, and there's all piles of other things that are going on that affect bumblebees. But anyways, it's not a good sign. And of course, then there's just general habitat loss, the conversion of all the nice meadows that the bees like with their flowers, and the woodlands and the weedy margins, and the loss of the flowers and nesting and hibernation habitat just to whatever, to pavement, to industrial areas, to residential areas, to highways and so on. So not a big problem perhaps on Salt Spring Island, but elsewhere, like here in the Southern Ontario picture, it adds up to quite a bit in local areas. And then finally, this is the last of the bad things, I think. I could be wrong. Climate change, as we're all hearing about these days, is happening rapidly and affecting the world in a big way that sometimes is unpredictable. And bumblebees, we should know, are cool adapted insects. They're big and fat and fuzzy. They're designed for cold places. They don't live in the tropics, like down low in the tropics. They don't, they're unusual in, like, there's way more bee species in the tropics than in the north, but bumblebees are temperate and Arctic species. Oh, sorry, I'm going to back up just to. So they've done a lot of modeling, knowing what the bumblebee, there's this fellow called Pierre Rasmont, you can see in this credit here under this picture. They've done a lot of modeling, knowing what the thermal tolerances of these bumblebees are, and so on, and using the predictions that the climatologists make for Europe in this case. In 2050, this bumblebee, which is common right now in Europe, you can see the red, that's not a good sign. And the only green patch and yellow patch is up here in the north. The rest of Europe is looking pretty bad. And by 2100, most of Europe is all red, and they're only going to be doing well up in the interior of the northern parts of Scandinavia. So the predictions aren't good for bumblebees in climate change. To make matters finally worse, this isn't a threat, an outside threat. It's just a way of life for bumblebees, and bumblebees, like all Hymenoptera, all bees and wasps, have a quite a different sex determination scheme than say mammals do, than say we do. They're what they call, there's a big word called haplodiploid, and it means that males only have one set of chromosomes and females have two. Like we all, as humans, all have two sets of chromosomes. And so a male comes from an unfertilized egg. Females come from fertilized eggs. And sex determination is by, so to be a female, you have to be diploid, you have to have two sets of chromosomes, and then you also have to have in a certain locus on a certain chromosome, you have to have different copies of that gene on both your sets of chromosomes. So it requires genetic diversity. So if you're inbred, you tend to have the same copies of that gene at those two sets of your chromosomes. And in that case, if you're what you call monozygous, if you only have one kind of gene there, instead of a female, you're going to turn into a sterile male. So that's not good for your future either. So this is called the diploid male extinction vortex, because as the bee gets rarer and rarer, the chances of it developing normal females becomes less and less. So how do we help? What can we do? What can we possibly do? Well, we can regulate the managed bee industries, and this is sort of beginning, but there's no real hard rule. There's not laws that deal with this. It's just all kind of best practices right now. So it's up to the industry people to manage themselves, to prevent escapes of those bees from the greenhouses, to manage the hives that are left at the end of the season. Do they just toss them out the door, or do they get rid of them in a way that the bees don't get out into the wild? So that's one easy thing. And also for the people that are producing the bumblebees back east in the bumblebee factories, to make sure that their bumblebees don't have these diseases. And also, if you're keeping honeybees, to limit the size of honeybee apiaries on wild lands where wild bees will live. And of course, use insecticides and herbicides and fungicides only when necessary. Part of the problem is people are using them now just as a matter of course, just because it's the thing they do to make sure that they don't get any pests on their crops, and they don't even wait till the problem happens. And of course, maintain flower-rich habitats, which I'm sure you're doing on Salt Spring, and keeping your landscape diverse and untidy. That's the main message here. If you want to find ways of doing that, or getting ideas about encouraging pollinators in your backyard or in your neighborhood, you can go to this society, the Xerces Society, which is the big invertebrate conservation society. It's based in California and across the states, really. But they have a nice website, which here you can just Google Xerces and pollinators, and you'll get all the information you'd like. And again, beekeeping, I'm sure, probably some of the people, I think at least one of the persons on this call keeps bees, and that's great. But as long as you know that it's not bee conservation, we hear a lot about decline in bees, and a lot of people think that they should be keeping more honeybees. So keep bees if you want to produce your own honey. And if you think it would be fun, that's super. I love honey myself, and I appreciate the honeybee for pollinating all our big crops. But keeping honeybees for bee conservation is like raising more chickens to help bird conservation. It's not helpful in that sense. So don't think you're doing good by keeping honeybees. Honeybees, I'll just say one, I didn't say this at the beginning, but they're not a native species in North America. They're from Europe. So they're an exotic species here. They're a farm animal. So we don't, you know, we don't help the caribou by raising more cows, that sort of thing. So this talk is going all over the place. So I'm just going back to identifying bumblebees and a bit about citizen science, how you can help, you know, put your get your records out there. So unfortunately, identifying bumblebees is harder than you'd think. It's certainly harder than I thought when I first started. I thought, well, here's a big insect, and you know, they got colorful patterns. It's got to be easy. It's like going bird watching, but it is harder than you think. So here's two bees side by side that look kind of the same, identical, right? Well, and then you know, I'm going to say photography. My main message is to get every possible angle on the bee and take as many pictures as you can before trying to get them identified. So here are those same two bees closer up. And let's look at the leg. Okay, the leg on the right here, I don't know if you can see that, but it's all sort of dark and shiny black. It's not easy to see, but it's a big, broad hind leg. It's a pollen gathering leg. This one is not shiny black. It's covered in hairs, and it's not made for gathering pollen. So that's one clue. And oh, they've got both white abdomens, but if you looked at if you wanted to get a real close up of the tip of the abdomen for a real good microscopic identification, this one's good, but oh, this one's behind the flower. Yeah, you got to get a better picture. This one on the left is a Bohemian cuckoo bumblebee. This one on the right is a Western. So you can see how closely they mimic well, the Bohemian is mimicking the Western is what it's doing. So to make sure you've got a Western bumblebee, and if you ever get a Bohemian or a Suckley's cuckoo bumblebee photograph, that would be fantastic. But to make sure, to be able to identify it from a photograph, you have to get some spectacular photographs of every little piece of the bee. So it does limit the value of photographs in some cases. But I don't want to discourage everybody from that, because you can do a lot, you can get a lot of them identified and learn about the bees in your backyard. Again, there's that yellow fronted bumblebee there, but you got to be careful about the little obscure bumblebee. And here's a yellow banded. That's an easy one to take pictures of. Then when you get the bumblebees, these bumblebees with orange and yellow on them are all in this group called the Pyrobombus. And here's three species that are all different, but they all kind of look the same to me. But if you get good pictures of them, we can sort them out. And I really, really encourage you to take lots of pictures of bumblebees and put them up on iNaturalist or Bumblebee Watch, or both. You can do it both. So join up iNaturalist if you're not already, and start uploading pictures. You can do it on your computer from your big camera, or you can take pictures with your little phones if that's what you're doing. But it's really boomed in the last few years, and it's really helped us track where the rare bumblebees are, and also the state of whether bumblebees are declining or not. But getting back to the difficulty in identification, there's still a real value in collecting bumblebees. And that's a whole nother topic, and it's probably best for a field trip, not a talk. And Claudia at the RBCM would be one to talk to about that. And but we're always keen on getting more bumblebee specimens if they're done properly, and it's quite easy to do. And there is a new, well, it's not new anymore. It's 7 years old now. This Bumblebees of North America. And it's all we've got right now as a field guide, and it's pretty good. It's still not the best. It's not written perfectly for the amateur like myself or you. But there is a new edition coming out, they say, and I hope they take some advice and make it a little easier to identify things with. The other benefit of now, in the last 7 years, there's so many wonderful pictures of bumblebees out there now for use in identification that I think the new edition will be fantastic. So definitely look this one up if you want to start learning on your own. Oh, just the last little thing. Again, all these declines were based on, all these assessments of threat and endanger were based on these rates of decline. And we don't have data. We didn't have data then, and we don't have data now for most of the species ranges. These are broadly ranging species. And it's hard to measure a real decline rate without data taken everywhere the same way. It's all been done ad hoc in the last 20 years for the most part. So what I've been trying to get going in the last few years is to get a new way of sampling bees so that we can detect trends over their broad ranges. We need these repeatable, easy to undertake surveys. And being a bird watcher, I thought of the breeding bird survey, and Dave Fraser and I thought of this at a COSEWIC meeting, and we said, geez, if only we had to do collecting bees like the bumblebee survey, the BBS, just like the breeding bird survey that's done all across North America by thousands of people every spring. And this actually, when we looked it up, it had actually been thought of already by Sam Droege, who is a US Fish and Wildlife Service fellow back in the States. And he used to run the breeding bird survey. And so he had the same idea when he switched to bees too. And they've tested it in Vermont, and Sam's running it all the way down the Blue Ridge Mountains. And so what you do is you just do a breeding bird survey route, but we just do 10 stops. And I say 1 every 4 kilometers, but if you're on Salt Spring Island, you might want to do it not every 4 kilometers. You might not get a whole route on your island. And we just search for bees for 10 minutes at a time. We net them, put them in vials, and then get them identified later. So you don't even have to know what bumblebees you're collecting. And in the Yukon, we've done 25 surveys now. Not every year, all of them, but there's only a handful really that have been done all those 5 years. But we've done 25 routes now in the Yukon. And sorry, I'm going to go back. And I know Jennifer Heron, who's the invertebrate species at risk person for BC, is trying to get these going in BC. She's hiring some people to do them for herself. But we want to do a lot right across Canada to get this going. So in the Yukon, just to show you what this is after the first year, we just graphed them all out here. You can see the one on the left here. Guess what's the most common one here? The McKay's bumblebee, the one we were concerned about. It's still the most common bumblebee in the Yukon, or at least this portion of the Yukon. And out here on the very rare right-hand side of this graph are Bohemian and Suckley's cuckoo bumblebees. So they're still up there too. Not very many of them, but maybe they weren't that common to begin with. And then you can look at frequency instead of abundance across routes. So one of the more frequent ones was this yellow-faced or yellow-fronted bumblebee, the flavifrons that we showed you a picture of here earlier. And then we did it again in 2018. And I don't want you to pay attention to all these, but just to show that you can do it statistically with error margins and so on. And it doesn't work well when you just only got 2 years and 10 routes that you're comparing. So it would be much better if we had lots more routes and more years. But you can see that you can compare year by year numbers for these bees. The blue is 2018 and the red is 2017. And we've done 3 more years after this, but still gathering up the data. So any volunteers, please let me know if you're interested in doing something like this. We can get you outfitted and going on it. So that wraps things up, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thanks very much. You're muted, Dave.
That's on my side. Yes, I am. Thank you very, very much, Syd. Really, really fascinating. And we had lots of questions coming in. So without further ado, can we start asking you a few of these?
Sure. I'll just bring up the chat too, or you
Yeah,
want to?
why don't you just go ahead and read a question and address it, and then mention who it's from. So Joanne Whitehead.
What differentiates bumblebees from other bees? Okay. Well, bumblebees in general, they're colonial for one thing. So most bees are either most bees are solitary. The females build their own little nest and they feed their young with pollen in their own little way. There's various families of bees. I don't want to get into huge detail here, but bumblebees are colonial, so they have a worker and a queen and worker and male caste. So as I said, they have these colonies that last through the season. they're different, honeybees have a colony too, but the whole colony tries to survive the winter. And that's why honeybees make a lot of honey, because they have to feed themselves this honey all winter long. So the colony can survive through to the next year. And they change out queens and so on and so forth. But bumblebees just have the queen surviving the winter. They do tend to be bigger and furrier than other bees, and that's because they do tend to live in the north and or the temperate zones. But mainly there are these colonial bees that where the queens are the only ones that survive the winter. Correct me if I'm wrong, Claudia. There's so many other kinds of bees. I don't want to get into the other differences between those ones. And again, Karen says, why are bombus bees on the decline in southern BC? Well, I tried to explain, I don't know if I got that through, but the subgenus bombus seem to be very susceptible to these gut parasites, these microsporidians. And I think that's what's causing them the trouble. And it's probably one of these things where it's like the tip of it's the straw that broke the camel's back, in the sense that, if you look at the sporidia, the microsporidia in bumblebees in Alaska, for example, way up in the wilderness, the western bumblebees or the McKay's bumblebees up there still have a lot of gut parasites, but they're fine and healthy, so they can do well with a few parasites, just like we all can. But if you add on to that the pesticides, the lack of habitat, the climate change, all these other things, the hot weather, the smoke, I don't know what all, but you just keep adding on these little indignities all the time, and then they just can't handle their parasites anymore. And so suddenly the parasites go kaboom. That's one idea. If we have pictures of wild bees, where would you recommend sending them sharing to? Yeah, iNaturalist, that's my chosen one. I belong to iNaturalist and Bumblebee Watch. They're a slightly different format. iNaturalist is kind of a crowdsourced identification. There's a fellow called John Asher, who's one of the world bee experts, and he's like crazy on iNaturalist. And the nice thing about iNaturalist, if you put up a good picture of a bumblebee that's identifiable, John, who's based, and I don't even know where he lives. He used to live in Singapore, but he's connected with the American Museum of Natural History. He'll identify it within 24 hours, if not 2 hours, if it's identifiable. So that's on iNaturalist. And I would recommend, I'm not sure, in the Yukon, we recommend everybody to join up with inaturalist.ca rather than inaturalist.org. It's not vital, but it helps out the local organizations that are organizing projects and things like that. And the best guide to BC bumblebees is that the North American one that I showed you. There isn't a local one. There is a local, if you look online, you can find kind of identification sheets for the Pacific Northwest for the US, and that might work for southern BC quite well. Do you feel that COSEWIC listing has actually protected any of these bumblebees? Honestly, well, I'd say the answer is not yet. No, that's for sure. We're just starting to put out these management plans and recovery strategies. And of course, those are just kind of like, there's no laws behind those, in the sense that there's no law that says BC or whatever the provinces or industries have to do what's in the recovery strategy. It's just a guide. And so, the Species at Risk Act, I could go on and on about the Federal Species at Risk Act, but there's very little the federal government can do in many cases, depending on the threats. It's mostly up to the provinces and local governments. So it's a piece of legislation designed to bring people together and work together to help these species. And so I think, there's certainly a lot more public awareness now. I don't know if that has anything to do with COSEWIC, but hopefully as people become more aware of the problems, that some things will be done. But I don't see it happening very quickly. What do studies show about the factors involved in the parasitic relationships between the cuckoo species and their host? Well, there are very, 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 very few studies. So there have been no, like the main study we look at there are no studies, I think, on the Western bumblebee and its parasites. There are some studies on the yellow-banded bumblebee and the cuckoo and the Bohemian bumblebee, but that was done back in the 70s, I think, or the 80s. So there's a lot more room for these studies. That's all I got to say. We don't know. Are there forest specialists in the bumblebee world? Not really, because bumblebees like flowers, and flowers in dense forests aren't very prevalent. There are bumblebees. There's one called the Sitka bumblebee, Bombus sitchensis, which is kind of the bumblebee of the West Coast forests. And it does like the forest, but it lives around the edges of forests, probably along the edges of creeks and stuff, wherever flowers are. But there's a lot of flowers in the old growth forests, you know, in those patches of lights between the trees, you know, all the heath family, the berries and the, you know, the huckleberries and whatnot are all great bee flowers.
Syd,
And
Syd, I was just going to add, this is Claudia, that the forest has overwintering sites though. So that's why they're really important to bumblebees.
no, and I was just going to say, yeah, thank you.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No, but I was going to say that the Western bumblebee, one of its features is that it likes forests nearby, you know, and that's probably because it likes to overwinter and it likes to maybe even nest at the edges of forest, because there's a lot more little mammals living in them, maybe, or whatever, or there's lots of roots or hollow logs or whatever. And so you almost never find Western bumblebees away from woodland, at least. They need their trees or their forests around. But there are bumblebees that are prairie bumblebees, but the Western bumblebee is a woodland one. Susan says, I wonder what the role of heavy deer browsing on bee declines. Yes, well, maybe that's true locally for sure. Yeah, like in your neighborhood and on Haida Gwaii, where the deer have really taken over. They you know, I'm sure if they are eating all the huckleberries and whatnot and all the spring flowering shrubs, you might be having fewer pollinators. You're right. So yeah, deer. Oh dear. Do we need to reconsider removing invasive flower? Well, invasive, that's, yeah, that's a very good question. Do we need to reconsider removing invasive flowering plants if bees are using them? Yeah, so if you're, you know, there's always going to be competing, you know, nature is a big messy thing, and species need, I remember there was somebody doing a butterfly study on Mount Tuam once, and the recommendation was like more goats or something, because this butterfly liked it mowed down really, you know, they didn't like any tall things at all. So unfortunately, you know, if we're trying to preserve these native plants that are endemic to the area, you know, we've got to remove the invasive things that are covering them. I'm not sure how many bees use broom, for example, but they, you know, they probably do. You know, up here in the Yukon, bees like two big invasive, or not, they're not necessarily invasive, but some of them, they love dandelions. Bumblebees just love dandelions. So if they're in your lawn, try not to get rid of your dandelions. And they also they love up here the invasive white sweet clover, which is a really nice end of summer plant for them up here, because there's not many things blooming at that time of year. But white sweet clover grows really big and tall, and then produces these massive things at the later part of the summer. But it is difficult. But I mean, I guess the answer is that native plants are always better than exotic plants. But if the deer are eating all the native ones, then you got a trouble there. Takes some studying, I guess, and figuring out. So Pierre asks, even if neonics are not used in the flowering season, they can still impact several crops because they are systemic and produce a long time in soils. Yes, and that is true. And that's why it's still going to be a problem. You know, we thought that neonics were going to be banned once they started looking at the effects in aquatic systems, because they persist in the soils, and then the rains wash that into the wetlands and kills all the aquatic insects. But for whatever reason, and I'm told that the people doing these studies really wanted them to come out so that they could be banned, but they couldn't find the evidence that are serious enough to ban them. So they didn't ban them, but there's certainly a narrowing set of circumstances you can use them. But yeah, I can go on about neonics. They're designed to be systemic. They're designed to be put into seeds and then take over. They're found throughout the whole plant. So that's the problem for bumblebees, because the plants put out this pollen that is very tasty and good for the bees, but it now contains the neonicotinoids, and that's where a lot of the bumblebees are getting the neonicotinoids, is from the pollen of these plants. And then also, when they're building their nests, they're digging they're enlarging these burrows in the soil that might have neonicotinoids in them. So we don't know. There's people starting to study that, the effects that the pesticides in soils have on these bees. Oh, and then Kefra says that she's doing the study of deer browsing on bumblebees. Well, there you go. They're having a huge, yes. That's very interesting. I hadn't thought of that. We'll have to add that to our COSEWIC list of threats. But again, that's only in your area. It's certainly a problem in southern Vancouver Island, the Gulf Islands, and in that area. How do honeybees compare with bumblebees in terms of pollination? Well, that's another very big question. The honeybees are very good at some things, but bumblebees, you would never know this, but bumblebees are way better at pollinating berry crops, especially blueberries and anything in that family, the heath family, the blueberries, huckleberries, those kind of things that have and cranberries that have these tiny little flowers. But the bumblebee, they have their pollen inside these anthers that require shaking, that require a real good shaking to shake the pollen out. And honeybees aren't as good at that, because the bumblebees are bigger and buzz more, I guess. So it's called buzz pollination. So for blueberries, bumblebees are way better than honeybees. So getting rid of honeybees improve crop pollination. Well, and I think honeybees are better at, say, pollinating apples and almonds and things like that. And the trouble is, of course, in our system of mega agriculture, where half the California Central Valley is almonds, their bumblebees need flowers the whole season long. And so they're not good at resources that come and go after a few weeks. And then, so if you're in the middle of an almond orchard, you're doing great for 3 weeks of April or something. And then the rest of the year, there's nothing. And so the bumblebees would die. And so that's why they're moving honeybees around in trucks all the time from crop to crop to do it. So it's a big that's part of the big problem, is this industrial agriculture, the scale of it, to pollinate our crops. So we need those honeybees because of the way we've designed the system. But we wouldn't need them if we didn't have that big system. If we had orchards with flower hedgerows and so on throughout the summer, that bumblebees could use throughout the summer. And Barbara says we have a large forest, originally Mac and Blow. Yeah, I don't know, the local botanist would be able to tell you what the bumblebees don't really. They're pretty generalist, so I can't say. There's lists of, the bumblebee guide here, this one here, it has lists for every species. It lists the flowers that they've been recorded from, but it's such a huge list for each one. And I know bunches of flowers that they eat that aren't on that list. And so pretty much any flower that produces a lot of nectar or pollen would be good. Some bumblebees have long tongues and some have short tongues, different species. So some are better at the big, columbine, maybe not columbines, but the big peas with the long, they need longer tongues, and the ones like the more open flowers. So, but just a variety of flowers. So bumblebees tend to love members of the pea family, I can say that. And they love the members of that blueberry family. And aster, anything in the aster family too. So as long as they're producing nectar and pollen, I don't know. But that Xerxes website should help you a lot, I think, because it's made for the west coast of the United States. And so Salt Spring should be the same, I would think. There's David's got that one. What are things that each of us can do in our gardens to help with bumblebees? Well, Victoria says this, ask that. You know, those three things require providing flowers throughout the season from the spring on. In the Yukon, bumblebees just love willows. You know, they love pussy willows first thing in the spring. That's what you'll find. It each willow bush has just a halo of bumblebees on it in for a week in late May. So I don't know in Salt Spring if there's many blooming willows like that, but from that, you know, there's lots of unlikely plants that bees love, you know, so, but mainly to have nectar and pollen available through the summer. And the other thing is to keep them messy and keep logs and leaves and stuff piled up so that they can hibernate in nice little dry protected places. And you can also, if you want, which is work, but I mean, people have these bird box building programs and birds don't nest in every of their boxes, so you don't expect success. But you can make bumblebee nest boxes for your garden and put them either on the ground or in the ground. And the success rate is, you know, kind of low, you know, like it's down in the probably 10 or 20% range. So you have to build a lot of boxes to get a bee nest, but that's one way you can guarantee that there are these nest sites if you don't have a lot of little burrowing mammals around. So that's one thing to do. Pierre says, should we encourage citizens to do destructive sampling if bumblebees are in decline? Well, I do. And destructive sampling means, you know, sampling so that we kill them and make a sample of them and give them to Claudia for the collection. But the thing is, as we've learned, is that bumblebees, you know, each of those nests produces dozens of individuals. And there are many nests. There are way more nests around than you would expect. There are thousands of bumblebees visiting your garden, you know, from hundreds of meters around, you know, from various nests to one spot. And so our, for example, these roadside things, which I do over like 35 kilometers, in 35 kilometers, I collect 100, 150 bees, which sounds like a lot of bees, but there's probably 10,000 or more bees in that stretch of land or more. So it doesn't affect the population one iota. And, you know, there are traps that if you keep in the same place and keep sampling bees day after day after day after day after day, yeah, you could have some effect on the population. But we really need to know if these bees are still declining or what. You know, we just don't know. And the Species at Risk Act, for example, has several categories, and one of them is decline, as opposed to a small population in a little local area or something like that. And bumblebees are widespread, so we have to know. It sounds ridiculous, but we have to know if they're declining in order to get them listed. And we can't prove to any of these other biologists that they're declining if we just say, oh, I think there's not as many as there used to be when I was a kid here, you know, like that doesn't cut it. So we need to do some sort of sampling, and it's really difficult to get good photographs to identify those bees and to get enough of them to get good statistical samples. So this destructive sampling is a really quick and fast and accurate way, because we can then give those specimens to the bee expert of Canada to be sure that we've got a Suckley's cuckoo bumblebee, and not try to identify between Suckley's cuckoo bumblebee and Bombus bohemicus. That's another difficult thing. So we do unfortunately need those samples to measure our bumblebee declines. And it sounds counterintuitive, but I can. Yes, David?
How many sample routes would you sort of guess would be required to do a good sampling on Salt Spring Island? Do you have a sense for that?
No, we have no sense at all, because we haven't really done it yet. You know, we've just done these first few in the Yukon, and I was just trying to get a hold of one of the big bird biostatisticians today, but he's on leave right now. But so I'm sure it would just be part, like when I go out and do a breeding bird survey, like I did one in Oliver, you know, in my youth, and I'm doing, you know, one in Atlin now and one on the Haines Road. That one survey won't tell us what the birds are doing, you know, because it's statistically it's so noisy that it doesn't do it. But what happens is when you get 100 surveys across British Columbia, and do them over 5 years, say, then you start to get this massive amount of data, which really tells you something, and you can see the picture much more clearly. So it's like doing the Christmas bird count, right? You go out and do a Christmas bird count for fun, and you count birds, but there's a lot of noise in that data because it happens, like that it's windy and cold one day and cloudy and stormy, and the next day it's perfect, and so there's huge variation in how many birds you see. But over North American scale, when thousands of these are done, we can really track the fate of birds on Christmas bird counts. So the same thing would be true for a bumblebee survey. So it's being part of a larger thing, like be going on iNaturalist and just putting up 10 pictures of bumblebees is great, but it's not going to tell us anything about bumblebees in detail. But if it's part of a program across North America where 30,000 bumblebees are photographed every year, then we can really start to put it all up. It's that whole big data, big data. So that's my goal, is to get it to be big data. We are being encouraged to keep mason bees. Please comment. Well, again, I'm not very much of an expert on mason bees. Perhaps someone else, maybe Claudia, knows more about them than I do. But it's like honeybees too, and so I would prefer people to make their garden a very friendly place for just bees to come and colonize and use them. You can set up little leaf cutter bee homes, those little tubes, you can drill holes in wood and make sure there's homes for various leaf cutter bees, and all sorts of things come in and use them, whether they're leaf cutter bees or they're parasites or other things. So that's my suggestion, would be to just make your garden a friendly place for wild bees. Can you talk about bumblebees and sting? Well, they sting, but they don't sting like it's not like a honeybee, which jabs you and then the whole the bee dies and the sting sticks in you. There's no barbs on the sting, that, or at least not very, so it's just a little quick jab that hurts. So yeah, when you're catching them, you have to be careful. I can talk to you about that, but I rarely get stung, to be honest. Like I catch a lot of bees every summer, and I get stung, 2 or 3 times out of hundreds and hundreds. Yeah, there's the Pacific Northwest Bee Atlas. They've got a lot of really good stuff in that website. The P, it's in the chat there, PNW bumblebeeatlas.org. Claudia says there are many native plants that deer do not browse and bees love: yarrow, woolly sunflower, gumweed, Oregon grape. Yeah, Oregon grape, fantastic. I've seen a lot of bees on them. Pearly everlasting. It looks like nothing would like it, but bees do go to it. And it's interesting when you go out and look in the late summer, anyways, up here, that like the western bumblebee type bees will be on, say, for example, clover, but those cuckoo bumblebees will be on goldenrod. So they do have their preferences. So the variety again is really key. Yeah, tulips, deer just love the tulips. Yeah. Do bumblebee sting? Yes. So don't pick them up with your fingers. Yeah, Pollinator Partnership Canada, that's one I forgot to mention, sorry. They have great resource lists. So you can Google all these names and you'll get resources. There's more and more here, wow. There's Claudia's given the link right there. Well, I've run to the bottom.
Yeah, you've done really well, and they were great questions. There's one more just come in, a couple more.
So if you put out your bumblebee nest, I'm not an expert on bumblebee nest box siting. I've had a friend here who built a lot, and the only time she's got one nesting in it is the one that she threw beside her back door, kind of thing, and just like was sitting beside her house in the back door. So it's not in the sun, basically. No, I think they normally would be like in the shade or in the, or I don't know. They probably don't care because they're in the ground normally. So I remember seeing my very first one back in the 80s. A friend of mine in Holland had them, and he just had them in his, he had his regular little tilled flower garden in his backyard in Holland, and just had these bumblebee nests with these little tubes sticking out of the ground in between the rose bushes. Bees seem to get drowsy in thistle flowers. One thing that some people always say, they found these drowsy bees, are they in trouble? Often, you know what, they're males, and male bumblebees are just, I don't know, I think, you know, because they don't need to do much, they're the drones, they're the males, and they just hang out and they look really drowsy. And they often go to those like flowers like thistles or goldenrods or members of that, the aster family, and just kind of hang out. And I don't know if that's why they seem to get drowsy there. It's just that they're males, but I could be wrong there. But I know if I go walking here in late July and there are all these goldenrod flowers and they're just bumblebees just hanging out in there, they're all males.
This is fantastic, Syd, and I noticed in the last note here in the chat is from Linda Gilkison, and she suggests that people can get a list of good pollinator flowers from her just by emailing her, and that's there. And this chat is going to be a great resource for people that want to promote bumblebees. So we'll send that out with a thank you note for everybody. And speaking of thank you, I'd like to ask Pierre now to come on and say a word of thanks from us and from the Conservancy.
Yes. Thank you very, very much, Syd. Learned an awful lot tonight. It's your depth of knowledge on a lot of varied issues really impressed me. My own specialization is actually neonicotinoid insecticides. So I was actually quite pleased to see that, you were current. I mean, it's difficult to keep current because of the amount of information coming out all the time. So that was very impressive, and as was your presentation in general. I appreciated the suggestion for everyone to create pollinator-friendly gardens. I should point out that in the Conservancy magazine, the Acorn, last year, I can't remember which issue, but it's the one with the bumblebee on the cover, so it should be easy to find if you go to our website. We actually talk about the issue of pollinator-friendly gardens with respect to neonicotinoid insecticides. One of the issues that a lot of people are not aware of is if they go and buy plant starts, a number of those plant starts from large garden centers may actually have been treated already with neonics. Sometimes the garden centers themselves don't know because they get them from the wholesaler. So we've got the sort of step-by-step instructions in the article for people to basically talk to their garden centers, educate themselves to ensure that when they're setting up a garden, a pollinator-friendly garden at home, they're not actually creating a death trap for pollinators. But again, thank you very much on behalf of the Conservancy, on behalf of Nature Salt Spring Fledgling Organization, that I hope a number of people will join, as of course they will, hopefully hoping that they will join the Conservancy. Thank you very much.
Don't forget to mark your calendars for April 23rd for bald eagles, and Deborah has put a link to that very article that is mentioned by Pierre, so you'll be able to get that in the chat too. What a great resource! Look what you've done, Syd. You've inspired a lot of research on the island here. Thank you. And I should actually say too that we hope to be chasing bumblebees for you one of these days.
Yeah, we'll get in touch if anybody. Maybe I could put my, I'll just put my, or do you have my email address? Maybe you could put that in your journal. I don't, like you can put my Environment Canada email address in there. And if anybody's interested in doing surveys or has any other questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. And I'd love to talk to Pierre about neonics too, because I'm definitely not an expert on those.
Terrific. Thank you all for attending, everybody. It's really been a great evening, and we'll see you in April, I think, many of you. Okay.